Awesome. So this morning we'd like to welcome Chris Sacca here to the University of Nevada. Thank you very much for coming down from the mountain today. We understand it's also your anniversary today, if the Twitter universe is correct.
It is my anniversary,
so,
yeah.
Thank you very much for
taking
time.
Yeah. We got married at Squaw 4 years ago, yeah.
That's awesome. So you've got a little bit about the program. You got some bios from each of these folks. Many of them have watched numerous of your talks online, and so sort of the purpose of coming here today, at least from our perspective, is to sort of hear your thoughts on business innovation and entrepreneurship. But we don't want to rehash the stuff that you already have online, so we want to try to keep this focus on those lessons about innovation and entrepreneurship, in particular as they might relate to the African continent.
Wow, that's amazing. Reno's an amazing place, and that it's representing all of America to you is something I bet a lot of people on Periscope were like, that's interesting. So it's been a good time so far? Yeah, right on. I'm happy to hear that. So, well, it was a pleasure for me to come down. I know of this program. I worked on the Obama campaign, and I think to have a president who's finally recognizing all the potential in Africa has been fantastic, and to see the Young African Leaders Initiative is really cool. I had no idea you guys were in Reno, and so when they reached out, I was like, of course, I'd love to come down. That's really fun. I think it's particularly special to spend time with you. I want to do Q&A, but I also just want to say up front, as we were walking in here, I said, it's amazing how many of the people I work with in technology now, computer science programs are so intense that people don't get a chance to study abroad as much. They don't get to travel abroad. And so most people I work with haven't been to Africa. They haven't been to sub-Saharan Africa. I work with so many people who don't even realize that there's a mobile money economy there that is far advanced beyond what we have in the United States. So I've got companies now that work on top of that, like InVenture, that are doing incredibly well. But it's amazing how much naivety there is in this country about how powerful the economies are, how wonderfully robust the startup communities are, and the opportunity there. And so for me, I'm not doing this as a favor. I think it's a particularly cool chance for me to come here and hear from you guys as well. I think you're an amazing marketplace. I think there's fascinating talent and spirit and drive. And when I think about the obstacles that so many of you overcome to build companies, it's funny to frame that against how entitled and how easy a lot of entrepreneurs in this country have it these days. And so I'm interested to hear your stories, et cetera. But let's dive in. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Well, I actually have several questions along those lines, but maybe we can delay them and see how we go. So obviously you're intrigued by this group, and it's great that you're here to share your time with us. But maybe for the purposes of these folks, we've watched a lot of stuff online, but if you had to cut things down to their essence, what should we most know about what you value and who you are?
Like as a business person, or just who I am specifically?
Well, so both, actually. I think
Okay.
there's two things. I think we want to get to know you as a person, but we also want to get to know your business value. And one of the things that basically has been asked of every guest who's come here is, what are you most proud of, both as a person and as a business person? So kind of in that light.
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot. Well, that's like a book, right? That's like
yeah, several YouTube videos, several discussions.
Going back to my childhood, there's a lot of different ways to come across that. But I'll talk about how we have a few rules in my business. My partner Matt and I, when we invest in companies, I'm a venture capitalist. We invest in companies, and so we have a few rules. Number one at the top of that list is be proud of the deals we do. So we try to only invest in companies that I would be very proud to tell my daughters that's how we made money. I don't want to be, I don't want to ever have to equivocate or be ashamed of any of the reasons, why we got rich. And I think that's right at the top of our business life, and where business is just inseparable from personal life. I think there are a lot of people who have made money exploiting others, and I don't know how they sleep well at night, or I don't know how they look their kids in the eye and say like, hey, this is why we have all these fancy things, is because I figured out how to take advantage of poor people. And so I think that's right at the top for us, is just be proud of what we do, because to try and extract your business life from your personal life, I think is an impossibility. I think there are other principles that have served me well in business life as well as personal life. We have a strict, sorry to swear, but no asshole policy in terms of who we hire.
Can I take time out real quick?
Yeah.
So we know that you're not really here to look for investments in Africa, but we thought maybe we'd take a page from the swear jar thing.
Oh, okay.
I have a $500 billion note.
Oh, you got some of those. I've only ever seen those online.
You're gonna have this.
Oh my God, that is a $5 billion. I've never held one of these. That's amazing. Thank you. Thanks, man. These are legendary on the internet. I feel really lucky, actually. Thank you. But we have a no a-hole rule. And that means in terms of the people that we hire as well as the people that we work with. I think life is too short to work with jerks. And it's true. You take that home with you, right? So you might be in the middle of a good deal, a good opportunity, but you wear that anxiety and that frustration on you. You take it out on your friends and family. It's just with you, and life is just way too short for that. I try to work, and so many of these lessons, when you ask about me, involve work, because work is so much of a part of who I do, of who I am and what I do. And so there aren't very clear lines between those things. I don't have a formal office. So when we moved to the mountains up in Truckee, we just started inviting the entrepreneurs we work with to come stay with us at our house, because that's where I work. Later, that got to be where it was kind of stinky, because we always had a house full of 25-year-old coders and stuff. So we bought the house next door, and they come through there, Camp Lowercase, we call it. Yeah. But for me, I really want to only work with people who have lived, traveled, or studied abroad extensively. I think it's too easy for someone growing up in the United States to live in a very comfortable bubble all the time. When you can read every street sign and you can use Google Maps to get directions, et cetera, it means you never have to actually ask anyone for help. And so you can get through your whole life never actually having to rely upon anybody else. But when you pop out of the subway in Tokyo and you're like, I have no idea what any of these signs say, and I can't understand what the people around me are saying, and I'm lost and I'm late and I'm tired and I'm jet lagged, and you need to walk up and depend upon the kindness of a complete stranger. I think that teaches a certain humility. Sure. and a willingness to ask for help. In parallel with that, I think when we spend time in other cultures, it really helps develop our empathy. Sure. I think we start to develop this skill to be able to stand in somebody else's shoes and see how they see the world, what they're afraid of, what they celebrate, what their values are. And I think that leads to not just a better life experience, but better product building. So many products in technology are built by wealthy white kids who are products of great universities who've never really had physical challenges, and so they or economic challenges, and so they build products for themselves that don't necessarily take into account what the rest of the world would love to see, right? So we build phones with all these features that don't actually work without a really robust 4G connection or something. We build stuff in a bubble without understanding how the rest of the world works. And I just think the people that I have found most valuable and interesting and rewarding in my life are people who have been into all these other populations and have spent some time and they have that hallmark of humility, because they come back, and when we have what we call a bad day at work, it doesn't compare to a bad day where you're from. It doesn't compare to a bad day of a woman, a bad day of a woman in Tigray in Ethiopia who's walking 4 hours each way to get water, and maybe attacked by a lion, right? Like we don't take our lives as for granted, I think. And I think with that kind of humility, I think it's just much easier to cooperate. And so these are things that I think are personal values, but that certainly are work values as well. And all of this goes to one of the core skills that I think is underrepresented in our business these days is storytelling. I think that as we've gotten into this world of specialization, and our education system couldn't be more highly attuned to crank out incredible computer scientists and engineers, I think we have lost some of the real treasure that comes from studying the liberal arts and humanities, and from reading the great works and literally studying about death and dying and about healing and about other religions beyond what our own faith might be, and to be thinking about music and art and how all of these things influence ourselves as well as that build the perspectives of the people that we're working with or we're living with. And all of that goes to the art of storytelling. I think one of the things that's broken so often is without that empathy, we can't imagine what the audience wants to hear. And so we don't have, we're not actually providing value to them, or we're speaking to deaf ears because we're missing what's important and what's valuable to those people. And so I think the kind of perspectives that you, from your backgrounds, bring, I can imagine each of you has one foot in a world of incredible poverty, struggle, just some of the most fundamental questions of life. One foot in an entrepreneurial system that, we're in one of the most exciting economies in the world, where the new titans of business are emerging, and there are so many entrepreneurial opportunities for you, and it's like the Wild West. Maybe a foot dabbling in government, some of which are kind of relatively young governments, new governments. You're having to deal at a really young age with corruption already and stuff like that. You've got a foot in world affairs. So you've got 4 feet, by the way. So yeah,
wild animals.
Yeah. You're dabbling in world affairs because you can't avoid it. You're in the middle of world affairs. They deeply affect you. Somebody living here doesn't necessarily have to think about that as much, but you're in the middle of this global context, and so you have all of these very unique perspectives that I think many people here don't have. And I think they make you much more valuable and effective storytellers. So as you're building a solution to a problem, I think you're able to identify problems that many people might not see. And I think you're going to be able to build a solution that impacts not just the fortunate ones who've been able to go to university, et cetera, but people well beyond that. And you're going to be able to communicate that effectively to all these different audiences. I have to speak effectively to startup entrepreneurs. I also have to speak to fancy people on Wall Street who give me the money to invest in startup entrepreneurs. And so I have to speak those 2 different languages. And then I have to know the language of the users of the stuff too. And I have to make good guesses about, would normal people care about that product? Does it solve a problem for somebody that's not me? Is that I've been fortunate enough in my life that I don't really pay that much attention to prices for stuff. But I know for a lot of people, there's a very big difference between a free app and a $1.99 app, right? And so I have to be able to put myself in the shoes of the other person there and channel that. One incredible example of this from our portfolio is this company, InVenture. I don't know if you've heard of it yet. The entrepreneur's name is Shivani Saroya. So Shivani was born in India, but was raised by Indian parents in the United States. And her parents are this perfect contrast. Her dad is a incredibly successful investment banker on Wall Street, and her mom is a public health doctor working on just health for the masses, right? And she kind of grew up in both of these worlds, ruthless capitalist and incredibly, socialist, looking out for universal health care. So she spent time in an investment bank. She went to Columbia and is an econometrist, a brilliant mathematician, statistician. She worked in an investment bank and understands deeply the nature of deals, and she worked in mergers and acquisitions. And then she left there to work for the United Nations, and she spent 2.5 years in 9 countries, and in each country she interviewed 750 small business people and their families. And so this is across Africa and Southeast Asia, where she would go and see how these people who maybe they had a stall or a kiosk that they were selling from, or they were a seamstress, or they sold textbooks, et cetera, how they managed their money, how they accounted for their money, how they would borrow money, how they would take money out of the till to spend on their family, how they thought about investing in a second sewing machine so they could grow their business. And so she did this for 2.5 years and learned more about those economies than I think any person on the planet, and she was in her 20s. Then went back to work for an investment bank, was like, this is brutal. I hate this. So at night, she started building an app. And I remember I asked her, so who coded this for you? When she saw it, when she made it down, she's like, oh, I did. And I was like, but wait, I looked at your resume. You're not a coder. And she's like, come on, it's not that hard. I taught myself. And so at night, she would teach herself to code. And finally, her bosses at the investment bank were like, we think you have another job, don't you? She's like, yeah, I really want to start this thing. So they're like, go start it. We'd love to see you follow your passion. So InVenture has in Kenya, it's called, Kenya and Tanzania, it's called Mkopo Rahisi. And so, you know what? Yeah, cool. And so you basically download this app to your Android phone, and It instantly tells you if you're credit worthy, and it makes you a mobile money loan. And these loans, go for, sometimes it's personal expenses. Somebody died, I need bus fare to get to a funeral. Other times, like, I need to buy my textbooks. Other times it's, I need that second sewing machine and I can double the size of my business. And, she charges an interest rate that's about 75% less than what you'd pay if you were going through an informal money lender. Her repayment rate is higher than than what we call FICO, like the mortgage lender. So the credit ratings that we have in the United States actually have a lower repayment rate than the loans she's giving to people in Kenya and Tanzania with no permanent address, no prior credit history, and she's getting repaid back at a higher rate. It's fascinating. But there is no, and by the way, this will be one of the most successful businesses we've ever invested in. There is absolutely no way that business could have been built by somebody who was just sitting here all day and not traveling the world, not being exposed to all these different cultures, not understanding the financing challenge of a small business person or a family in one of these economies, not deeply understanding mobile money. As I mentioned, a lot of people don't even realize that you guys have these mobile money platforms. And so I actually feel like it's that kind of advantage that you're going to have as entrepreneurs, to have those perspectives, those very unique perspectives, to build for audiences that are ignored and yet have, so much spending power, who are growing their businesses so rapidly, who, you have this huge emerging tens of millions of people coming into the middle class for the first time as a result of technology. And yet a lot of the developed world, the investment folks, are blind to that. I'll give you a uniquely American example. We have a founder named Melody McCloskey. So Melody is a white woman who started a company called Style Seat. And I mentioned she's white for a reason. So it's a company that provides, if you're a stylist, if you're a hairstylist or you do nails, you can come onto this site and you can build a profile for yourself and talk about the services you offer, have a portfolio of your work, show your prices, and then people can book with you. And you can run your business there, you can have a calendar, you can take payment through it. It's a wonderful service. But when she first went and pitched it to venture capitalists, most of whom are white men, they were like, I don't get it, right? And even when she pitched it to me, I'm like, I know Melody, I know she's a great entrepreneur, I'll put in some money. And so I came home and told my wife, and I was like, I don't know if it's going to be a big deal, but we like Melody, I'd put in some money. And she's like, let me ask you a question. How much do you think women spend to get their hair cut in San Francisco? And I was like, I don't know, I paid $19, so maybe like 40? And she started laughing. It's like, no, it's like $200 to get your hair cut in the city. I was like, really? And then she said, let me ask you another question. Which of our blonde friends do you think is actually blonde? And I started listing off these friends. She's like, no way, that's like $500 every 3 months to be that blonde. And I was like, no way, this is a huge business. And I was totally blind to it because I lived in my own little world, right? So I went back to Melody and I was like, Melody, I want to put in more money. I want to teach me about this business. It's huge. And we started learning all about this industry. And again, I say white woman because one of the things that was interesting is that half of her business is black stylists doing black hair, which is a massive industry that my world was completely blind to, right? So braids and weaves and are just really, they're expensive. They're really important in that culture. And we were completely naive to it. And then even I learned, black men tend to get their hair cut much more frequently than a white guy. My hair can get all shaggy, it doesn't really matter, but you got to keep yours tight, right? And so this was another perspective that I was completely blind to. And it was funny, as she pitched investors, most of whom are white men, they were like, I don't get it, I'm not really into that. And so we kept buying up more of the company because nobody else would. Now it's a $100 million company and she's incredibly successful and she's empowered a whole generation of mostly women stylists who now own their own business. Instead of being dependent upon a salon, they now are in charge of their own business and booking their own stuff. But that was completely predicated on an atypical entrepreneur who had a view to audiences that most of us didn't. And as a result, she's built an incredible business. And so that's one of the things we're always looking for, are these businesses that don't necessarily serve the bubble. But we call, by the way, we call all these states in between California and New York the flyover states. So, because you're just flying over them. But that's real America, right? So Melody's company, Style Seed, is incredibly successful in Chicago, Houston, Atlanta, like all across these places where there are so many real Americans that are outside of our tech bubble, outside of our San Francisco lens on the world. And so that's what I think is a distinct advantage of this room, is a lens you have on solutions that many of us might not even know there's a problem there in the first place. And you identify a problem for a group of people who are being ignored, and then you have a unique perspective on how to solve it. And then you have the storytelling capability to both really bring in, think about the storytelling necessary to build an Uber, right? So Uber is this perfect marketplace between riders, the people riding the cars who are like, I can't find a cab, it's unsafe. Like, as a woman, I feel totally unsafe in a car, or something like that at night. And then on the other side, you've got these drivers who are like, I spend most of my day sitting around waiting. I work for a guy who owns the car, who takes 75% of my pay home every day. Like, this sucks. I'd love to control my own destiny. And so to build that business required founders like Travis and Garrett who could speak to both of those audiences, who knew them well. And Ryan, who is our other co-founder, Ryan Graves, like, he had this ability to like walk into a garage of seemingly hostile limo drivers and walk out arm in arm with friends. He just knew like what matters to a driver, right? A driver, and there are things, they don't just want to make more money, but real drivers want to be treated like professionals. You get into the back of a cab and it's so anonymous that they're bad to you, you're bad to them, because in 10 minutes your relationship is going to be over, and so you're just nasty to each other, right? But you get into an Uber where they know your name and you know their name and you're both going to be rated. Funny how everyone ends up being really nice to each other. Like, just humans start acting nice, and then the driver is like, look, I'm actually a skilled driver. I do this professionally. I want to be treated like a professional. You know that in so many other occupations and yet it's forgotten sometimes by people who haven't had that job, who haven't, a driver isn't just, a robot necessarily. They're a professional. They feel like they bring some style to it, some knowledge of the city, and they want to feel like they're in a system that treats them that way. And that was one of the magic, that's the magic Uber, and that's why it's a $50 billion company today. So anyway.
So yeah, you touched on many, many areas that I want to circle back to.
Well, I got to get my $5 billion worth, so,
Well, we'll make more. One of the things I guess I want, bringing it back to sort of the African perspective here is, we definitely live in a global economy. And I agree 100%. I talk to my students all the time about the importance of working and traveling and studying abroad. But curious to know, are you more inclined to partner, collaborate, do business with American who has studied and worked and lived abroad, or perhaps somebody from a developing country who has come to the United States and done some work here? And so maybe juxtapose those two positions and then maybe talk about what your single greatest expectation would be in terms of partnering with that kind of environment.
Well, I think if you look around our portfolio, there are some really cool stats out there that I can't quote off the top of my head, but how many of the most successful companies in Silicon Valley were started by foreign founders, right? By immigrants or children of immigrants. It's way out of, it's way disproportionate to what that population looks like across the United States, for instance. And so it goes right to what I'm talking about, this incredible perspective, this hustle, this, you show up here with a few dollars in your pocket, or your parents do, and you need to make stuff happen. You're a person who gets stuff done. And so if you look, even just when I worked at Google, we had people who, at the end of the day when you'd sit down for dinner, they'd tell you about the village they came from in India, and like how they got into the IITs, which is the top of their university system there, which is nearly impossible to get into. But everything they did to study and to pass those tests and then to get there, and everything their parents had to do to even pay for them to get there. And, you hear stories of entrepreneurs coming out of China. By the way, I actually shared an office once with a kid who looked Indian, and he had an Indian name, but he actually was, he grew up in Botswana. And he didn't grow up rich in Botswana. He grew up just African in Botswana. It was kind of wild. And I remember I just assumed he was Indian. We shared it. We had at Google, everyone sat, 4 people in an office one time. And then I mentioned something about Swaziland. And he's like, oh yeah, when I was a kid. I was like, you went to Swaziland as a kid? He's like, dude, I grew up right near there. And like, it was just surreal. I was like, wait, you're you're an Indian African. This is, but that guy had unique perspectives on the world, right? And really valuable. My wife actually, her parents are both in the Foreign Service, so she grew up in Mauritania, Gambia, and Swaziland, and she's half Chinese, and so she lived in Swaziland during apartheid still, and her parents couldn't rent, a regular rental car because she was mixed race, and they couldn't stay in the regular hotels, so she stayed in the colored hotels and rented from the colored, car rental places and stuff like that, which is surreal to think about for me, like an American girl, from an American family who actually experienced apartheid is a really interesting perspective. But I think, and by the way, she's been one of the most successful advertising creatives of her generation, I think, because so many of her international perspectives help her tell stories to people. So I think it all comes back to that. But so to answer your question, if an entrepreneur from another country comes here and shows that they have navigated this system well enough to build, to find resources. Like one of my biggest pet peeves is when somebody on Twitter says, hey man, can you give me your email address so I can send you a pitch? Like, if you're not resourceful enough to just look, my email address isn't a secret, it's on my blog. Like, if you don't have the minimum amount of hustle to go find my email address, like, there is no chance you're going to succeed in this business, right? If you haven't done a little bit of background. Like, I can't tell you how many people a day say, hey man, I'm going to be in San Francisco, it'd be cool to catch up. And I'm like, if you didn't even just look at my Twitter bio and realize I don't live in San Francisco, like, so they're interacting with me over Twitter and they haven't, like, just the minimum amount of effort. And yet you think about the real hustle. You think about, the Airbnb story was out. There was a great story on them and how many years they struggled with to put Airbnb together. You read the stories of Travis Kalanick, the founder of Uber, and how, his first company went so sideways, he moved back in with his parents, and like, so he was the CEO of this company living with his parents in their basement and trying to make stuff happen. Like, this is the kind of resilience. The people who, Shivani at InVenture I was talking about, like, she was meeting with all these heads of these banks in India, and I was like, how are you, like, like this, I mean, she's like this tall, 90 pounds. I'm like, how are you getting like these meetings with these honchos of all these banks in India? I'm like, do you have like connections or anything? She's like, nope, I just know how to make them feel like if they don't meet with me, they're going to lose money as a result. And I'm just like, damn, that works, huh? Like, that's like, she's just got hustle, right? And so I think there is definitely something to be said for somebody who comes from outside of this country into this country, has shown they can navigate this system, build a network, find these resources, get themselves into the right communities of people who can be helpful to them. So that's certainly it. What I don't do is invest outside of the country anymore. And that's only because so much of what I do to be helpful, I have found requires me to be close to the company. It requires some face-to-face meetings, some problem solving. Like, you can't find the right employee, I can probably recruit from my network to help you within my existing talent pools, which are basically like San Francisco, LA, New York. You need a place to move your office to, I can probably call landlords and figure something out. You have a sideways situation with an employee, you have to figure out whether to fire them or not, I can probably show up there and talk it through with everybody and maybe mediate the dispute, Or like, you need to sell the company. I don't actually know even in Western Europe, I don't know all the potential buyers. I don't have relationships with those. Here in the United States, I do. I know, like, okay, if this thing needs to get sold to Yahoo, I can call Marissa and talk about why to sell it to Yahoo. And so I found that when I invested overseas, I found amazingly talented entrepreneurs, very driven, a lot of hustle, no entitlement, no spoiled, kind of like just purely hardworking, but I was helpless. And so for me, that was like picking public stocks and just hoping for the best. And I like to play a game where I can personally impact the outcome, and that's going to come from investing in places where I feel like I've got resources to make it more likely that you're going to succeed.
Well, so circling back again, I think this notion of doing work internationally, you studied and wanted to do international work at some point in time, I think when you first started at Georgetown. Is that correct? And so
well, it's kind of funny. I went to the School of Foreign Service. I studied abroad a lot, so I was in Ireland, Spain, and Ecuador. And then later after school, I went to El Salvador to work for a while. But the problem is the United States Foreign Service doesn't pay enough money that you can afford to pay back your student loans. So
yeah, but you have some experience with that too, don't you?
yeah, exactly. But so that was amazing. Like when it came time to finish, college, I was going to make 26 grand, and yet I owed $100,000 that I had to pay back. So you couldn't do it. They've since gotten better, at doing loan forgiveness programs if you go into public service and stuff like that. But at the time, it just wasn't an option. Yeah. So I had to so I went to law school and I became a sellout and, did all that. Yeah. Well, that was another $100,000. And yeah.
You just got the degree. You didn't actually go, right?
I didn't go to a lot of law school. I just got the degree. Yeah.
So we had a presentation. We've had a couple different presentations, and some of our presenters talk about failure and fail fast. And one of the things that's difficult in African culture is failure is not easy, and you don't have many different opportunities to restart. And so kind of the question, going back to the Ethiopia example and others, is what advice would you have for entrepreneurs who work in environments of great scarcity, in particular when if you don't make it the first time, you may not get a second time?
Yeah. So I bet you it feels like that more than it's truly like that sometimes. And it's funny, there is always, in every industry, there's stigma about failure, right? So it didn't work out, so you don't have it. Technology in Silicon Valley was one of the first places where they figured out that there is a real feedback loop there, that there's a reason you didn't make it. And if the reason you didn't make it was honorable, so there's no second chance for fraud or deceit or lying or any of that stuff, right? But if the reason you didn't make it was honorable, you had the wrong idea, you were too early, you spent too much money because you hired up too fast, etc., then there is an incredible opportunity for learning there. And if you engage in that hard, painful process of going back through, and we call it the post-mortem, post-mortem is a word for when there's a dead body on the table and you try and figure out how they died, right? So we do that with our companies, a post-mortem. It's got a dead company. What did we do wrong? Why did that happen? And if you go through that very painful personal process of what did I do wrong as a leader? Where did we go wrong with the product? You can come out so much stronger and so much wiser that in our culture, I think people have really started to embrace that and be like, okay, I understand why you messed that up. You weren't lying. You weren't full, you weren't full of it. You weren't stealing money. It was just, it was early. It was wrong. You went about it too much. You were a little, hubristic or conceited. And so there's an opportunity there to restart and to have people who've been through that same process go through that and be partners in your next business. I realize that's not the case often outside of Silicon Valley. One amazing example I saw was, have you guys heard of MC Hammer?
Yes.
Remember him?
Yes.
By the way, this goes to my point. So I was at a tech conference once, and there was one black guy in the room, and I'm kind of like, is that MC Hammer? And I'm like he was in the audience with everybody else. This is 2004, I think. I'm like, I'm going to sound racist if I just walk up to a black guy and say, are you MC Hammer? But I'm pretty sure that's MC Hammer. And so I just hey man, this is going to sound weird, but are you Hammer? And he's like, yeah, hey man, what's going on? I was like, holy shit. And he didn't have the pants, or anything, but I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I love technology. I've always been a fan of technology. I'm like, I had no idea. This is 2004. MC Hammer had been long gone from my memory, right? So I said, well, I know it's been a long time, but as a kid, I was a big fan. I was like, I was working at Google at the time. I'm like, would you come down to Google and hang out? Would that be interesting to you? And he's like, I'd love to do that. And so I went back to, a bunch of my colleagues and was like, MC Hammer wants to come hang out and learn what we're working on. And everyone was like, oh yeah, immediately. And so I got people from the Blogger team and from the search team and the Orkut team. I don't remember Orkut from back in the day, but all this stuff we were working on. And I gathered everybody around, and they went nuts for Hammer. And he loved it, and he was giving us all this great feedback on technology because he had very unique perspectives that we didn't have. And so it was very cool. But I noticed something as he walked across our employee cafeteria, people went nuts for him. And people who I thought were kind of too young to even know who he was, and people from all around the world, all over Africa, all over India, all over Indonesia. All these engineers who worked there were like, oh my God, it's MC Hammer. And so what was amazing was in the American music business, he very famously made a bunch of money and spent it all and was bankrupt, and that was it. He was over. And so I saw all of this love for him, and I went back to my friends at the music labels. I think you guys are missing an opportunity. Hammer is universally loved. I have never seen anything like this. because, he failed not for the wrong reasons. He just spent all his money on his friends and his family, right? He didn't steal anybody's money. He didn't lie. He had no scandals. He just spent all of his money on his friends and family until there was none left. And so, there was honor in that, right? You can't criticize him. And he would blog, like we set him up with a blog, and that day he was already blogging from he had his son born prematurely. So he went to the hospital and took a picture and was like, this, we're rooting for Sammy to come home from the hospital. And then you saw these soldiers from overseas who were like, you're really helping me. Like, I love you. I love your faith. You're helping me get through day by day in Iraq and stuff like that. And I was just like, you're missing this opportunity. All my friends in the music industry were like, oh man, he's washed up. He's old news. I was like, wait, I thought music was just about an audience that loves you and is willing to buy your stuff. I feel like this is the guy, right? So what happened was we started getting him involved in more technology companies. And I'll tell you today, Hammer is rich. Hammer started advising in and investing technology companies and made tens of millions of dollars by being so valuable to Silicon Valley that, in essence, we kind of noticed okay, what they considered failure was just him spending all his money. But he's so valuable and he's got these valuable perspectives that it's been an incredible second act for him. And if in my world, he is a known technologist, and Hammer's at all the parties and the launch events and stuff like that. I'm not kidding.
It's wild.
I brought, you guys know Wyclef? Yeah. All right. So Wyclef's a friend who I brought to an event once that Hammer was also at, and Will.i.am was another friend, and I got these three together, and they'd never met. Okay. No, but they'd never met. It was a Google event, and so here's Hammer, who the music industry considers washed up. Wyclef comes up to him and is like, oh my God, you have no idea. All I ever wanted to be as a kid was you, right? He's like, and one day I was working as a busboy in a restaurant, and this little kid kept saying to his dad, hey Dad, I think that's MC Hammer, like serving our table, as the busboy, And the dad's like, no, I don't think so. And the kid's like, no, that's definitely MC Hammer at Wyclef, right? Saying this to Wyclef. And so the dad comes over and is like, hey, I got $20 if you'll just tell them my son you're MC Hammer, okay? And Wyclef is telling this story to MC Hammer, right? And MC Hammer's like, what'd you do? Were you offended by that? And he's like, hell no, I took the $20 one. But anyway, it was just amazing to see how he had been branded a failure, and yet had come out of that with an audience, with love, with all these skills, with this humility. And so one of the things I think that happens, I don't know if you know my story, but I lost all my money and more in the spring of 2000. I was
7 days.
Millions of dollars in debt. That would have been very easy for me to just go home and live with my parents. So I came out to Silicon Valley, convinced somebody to give me a job, was working all day and all night to try and pay that money off. And then I got fired 4 days before September 11th. So I was yet again another failure, right? So I just kind of stayed in the game and hustled. And, and again, it was a really bad economy. In fact, you couldn't even get a truck to move your stuff out of San Francisco because all the trucks had gone one way to everybody else's parents' home, and not come back. It was just that bad. It was just really, the economy was messed up after the crash of the bubble, they called it. But there's just this unique opportunity that I think if you separate the public perception of you as a failure and your internal perception of you, I think that's where the opportunity is, right? So the people around you may consider you like, well, they tried once and they didn't work, so. But I think if you really do a deep internal inventory and say, okay, why did I fail? And be honest with yourself about, and which of these things are traits of mine that I'll never be able to change, and which of these things are things that I know I can do better next time, right? That one of the things that I think will result from that is people can just smell resilience on you. You just give it off. Think of the most successful business people around you. They may succeed, they may fail, but you can just smell that they're going to come back from this, right? You just feel it around when you're around them. I remember when Kevin Systrom, who founded Instagram, was pitching me. And so at the time, I didn't really believe in photo sharing. I know that sounds hilarious now, but I had already invested in and sold a photo sharing company. I wasn't sure that photos were going to be the thing. our phones were still slow enough that it was hard to like download a bunch of photos and stuff like that. So I know that's not, like, I was kind of wrong in my initial judgment. So I wasn't against photo sharing. I just didn't know if it would be that big. Many, many companies had tried and failed in that space. And so, but I sat down with him. He was a smart guy. He'd worked at Google briefly. He was well referenced. And as he was talking to me about Instagram, he didn't use conditional statements like, well, you know, if it gets this big, it would be awesome. You know, instead he was just like, so when we get to 50 million users, that's when we'll roll out this next feature. And I was like, holy. And like, as he's talking to me, I feel like he's actually looking through me to like the future, you know? And I'm like, oh man, I better get on this train before it leaves the station. Like, there was so much inevitability in his voice, in his pitch, that this will succeed, right? And as I think about the entrepreneurs that I've worked with that have been the most successful, Travis at Uber, and Garrett at Uber too, Ryan at Uber, I guess the co-founders there, but Kevin at Instagram, Evan Williams at Twitter, Larry and Sergey at Google, Elon Musk, like all of these people, when you talk to them, there isn't really doubt in their voice. They just know this thing is going to work. And so when you're around them, you're like, I better get involved. Like I you know, this is an opportunity. I know this person's gonna make it. I have backed other people where my mistake was, I thought their idea was good, but I didn't realize like they had so much self-doubt, you know, or so much questioning or so much fear that they couldn't end up executing on that. And so the number one thing I look for now is not brash cockiness, right? That doesn't work. You can't be unrealistic about the challenges that are ahead of you. But I look for people who just know they're going to tackle those. Scott Harrison, who runs Charity Water, you know, that guy could be any executive in any company. He's one of the greatest storytellers of all time. He chose to do this because it's part of his faith. He's very Christian. He really wants to give back. He knows the impact he can have. I deeply admire him. But he has built that charity like a startup. You know, he recruits engineers from Twitter and Snapchat and Facebook and has them build actual technology and the fundraising mechanisms, and he runs it like a startup, and that's why it's been so successful. When we sat down a few years ago, he'll be like, so, you know, in 2015 when we've got $100 million in donations, and you're just like, wait, this year we have one, you know? But he just knows, he's just confident he'll be able to go out and find more big donors, find more partners, roll out new software. And I think that's the thing. If you come out of a failure knowing that that wasn't because of who you are deeply inside, that wasn't because you stole money from people and you lied and cheated and deceived, but if you come out of a failure, you're like, I know why that happened, man. You know, like, I misread the couple of people I hired. You know, I wasn't just, you know, as picky as I should have been in picking out who I hired for that company. I was too early with the product. I didn't listen to this feedback enough. Like, you know, I spent too much money on this stuff. I was distracted. I was trying to do business deals when I needed to improve the product itself. And if you do that kind of assessment and you find out, look, it's not because I'm a bad person or I'm fundamentally flawed, but you'll come out of that so much stronger that when you put your next idea together, you'll know, like, I deeply understand this problem that needs to be solved. I deeply understand the constituencies that I'm going to need to solve it. I know I'm going to solve it. Like, I know this thing is work. I know I am the most uniquely qualified person in the world to do it. That's one question I ask people all the time. Why are you the most uniquely qualified person in the world to address this problem, right? And so, you know, there's a guy named Tristan Walker who runs a company called Bevel. I guess the parent company is Walker and Company, but it's Bevel. So he sells shaving equipment for black men's faces. And so, like, I wasn't going to come up with that idea, but when I talked to Tristan, I'm like, what? I don't get it. Like, is it just, you're just marketing to a different crew? And he's like, no, you don't understand. Like, all of these razors that, and by the way, I don't even shave anyway, so, but he's like, all these razors that have 3 blades, 4 blades, all they do is create ingrown hairs on black men's faces. And so he's like, black men need a single blade. And like, nobody makes single blades anymore, you know, because it's all oriented around a white market. And he's like, and black men need a different kind of conditioner for their face to prevent those ingrown hairs and bring the hairs up to shave and this kind of stuff. And he, you know, you ask him, why are you uniquely positioned to be the best in the world at this? And he's like, because I just spent the last 2 years getting to know every single person at Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, and Gillette, and everybody in this space He's an incredible business person who had he grew up incredibly poor in a neighborhood in New York City, worked his way up, made it to Stanford Business School. And he's like, and I just know, he's like, I'm good at design. I want to make these the most beautiful products in the market, not the most beautiful products for black people, the most beautiful products in the market. And you can go to his site and check it out. It's gorgeous. But it's a hugely valuable company that will make him incredibly rich now. And he's very proud of the impact. But again, it came from one of these perspectives. Now, on the way there, like, he worked at Foursquare, which is a cool company. It hasn't been an incredible success, and so it'd be easy to be like, you worked at Foursquare, like, that hasn't really, you don't have a stamp of like a Google or a Facebook on your arm or something like that. But it would have been easy to judge him. Instead, he just knew, I'm the most uniquely qualified person on the planet to do this. And when you talk to him, it wasn't like, well, if we're lucky enough that some guys buy this stuff, he just knew, like, I'm going to win this category. And ultimately, it's going to be a competition between Johnson & Johnson, Gillette, and Procter & Gamble, and whoever, to see who's going to pay the most to buy this out, because there's a whole market that's been underserved here. So, I don't know, those are my thoughts on failure. I think those are I'd say, by the way, similar thoughts on success. Anything you can do to develop yourself to where you are guided by your internal compass rather than your external compass is going to serve you incredibly well. It's so easy. Let me put it this way. You grew up your whole life, like, you've got your parents, like, they care unconditionally about you. You get a good grade in school, you do well in the soccer game or whatever, you've always got a good job waiting for you from your parents, right? Or your aunt or your brother or sister. Like, you've just got, so you've got this feedback loop, and you're like, I can't wait to get home and show them that I got an A on this test, or I can't wait to show them that I made this really cool project, or I did this incredible drawing. And so you're always waiting for that external approval and that feedback, right? Then you get into school, and your teachers, similarly, like, they really have your best interest at heart, and they want to give you that feedback loop. And so you got a teacher who's like, congratulations, that was a good paper. Like, I love that artwork you did. Like, your coaches, too, are just like, they really want to see you succeed. And so, like, I've never seen anyone run the mile that fast, or, you know what, your swimming has come a long way, or, like, it's been fun to have you on the soccer team because you've been I see how hard you're practicing. And so it's all built around this external approval. And then all of a sudden you leave college or you leave high school and you're out in the world, and there's nobody there doing that for you anymore, right? Nobody cares about you unconditionally anymore. They care about how you can help them build their stuff, right? They care about you as one of the inputs in their business, or their project or their government. And there's nobody there giving you that feedback, and yet you were raised on it. You're a little bit addicted. Everything, you've always gotten a good job, and now there's nobody there giving you a good job anymore unless it suits them, unless it was a good job that made them, yes, there are people in your church, in your community center, there are definitely great bosses out there who will give you an attaboy every now and then, but nobody's personal goal is completely aligned with yours anymore, and yet you're so addicted to that feedback that you start adapting yourself to other people's definitions of success. You start adapting yourself to other people's feedback. And yet you haven't developed this internal compass of like, wait, what's really important to me? You'll see this in your email. Open up your inbox, and there's science that says you get an actual dopamine release when there's, like, you get a little chemical release when you see that there's new email. Even if it's not great email, you get like, oh, hey, email. You get that from text, you get that from Snapchat, you get that like, oh, hey, that's for me. Like, even though it's just like sale at, so whatever, like, so, but you get that in your, and you'll see that you could spend all day in your email making other people happy, doing the things they're asking you to do. And yet, at the end of the day, when you close your computer, you're like, wait, I didn't actually do any of this stuff on my own to-do list. I didn't do any of this stuff that relates to my priorities, what I actually want to be doing, right? I didn't do anything about the book I want to write, about the physical fitness goal I want to meet, about this person I really want to get close to and try and introduce myself to, about this subject I really want to read more on and get to the Wikipedia and dive in and understand, about this product I want to go find somewhere I hear it's being developed. I want to go meet the inventors of it and see what I can learn. Like, no one else is asking you to do that stuff, and no one else is patting you on the back for doing it. And so it's very easy for it to never appear on your to-do list, to never, because you're just responding, you're reacting in your inbox. Similarly, it's just, as I said, it's very easy to just react to other people's definitions, other people's expectations, right? And so in conjunction with the failure discussion about looking internally, I think there's a success discussion there too, which is you could spend your whole life just conforming to other people's expectations, right? And you know these people who work in these big companies and are just like, look, I'm going to climb the ladder, right? And I'm going to impress this boss, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to send emails late at night so they think I'm working all day and night, and I'm going to dress, well, and I'm going to I'm going to put in the FaceTime, right? And their goal is to work in that kind of environment where, the success criteria have been defined by somebody else, whether in a law firm or a big corporation or something like that, or a big bank. Like, I'm going to deal by somebody else's success criteria. And so, but they haven't really developed, and it probably doesn't align with their own internal compass. You guys as young leaders, as entrepreneurs, as change makers, know that you probably have a very unique perspective on the world and a unique set of values. You probably felt weird in your schools, like you weren't necessarily like all the other kids because, you weren't following the lockstep pattern all the way through, right? You were nodding your head when you said you probably weren't very good at going to class either. I saw you. And so as a result, I think that you need to embrace some of that, and you need to dig in and say, okay, what really does matter to me? What is going to be success as I define it? How did that failure not really compromise that and instead make it more likely that I'll achieve that? How am I going to go out and actually take the initiative and hustle and get this stuff done? There's this incredible book right now. It's brand new, and it might not be as funny or interesting to you as non-Americans, but there's a guy in this country called Judd Apatow, and Judd is a comedian, but he's also producer of all these really goofy movies like This Is 40, or 40-Year-Old Virgin, or Superbad, and like just all these really, really goofy movies with Seth Rogen and James Franco and all these guys. So definitely not amazing movies, but he's been incredibly successful. And he wrote this book recently. He grew up in outside of New York, Long Island, and he always wanted to be a comedian. And he would tape our most famous comedy show is called Saturday Night Live, and he would tape Saturday Night Live at night, audio tape, because there were no VCRs yet. He would audio tape it next to the TV, and then he would write it down. He would literally transcribe it, and he'd try and figure out why those jokes were funny, like what made things that are funny. And he was doing this as like an 8-year-old, okay? And then when he got to be 13 or 14, he started a newspaper at his school so that he could use that to start interviewing comedians. So he would write to his most famous comedians and say, look, while you're in town, I'm the local press, I'd like to do an interview. And he didn't mention that it was for a high school newspaper and that he was 14 or 15. So he would, and he's written about this in this book. So he would show up and it would be Jerry Seinfeld. And Jerry's like, wait, what the hell? And he'd be like, okay, kid, and he would do these interviews, like as a teenager, just an incredible. And so what he published recently is the book of so many of these interviews from like 30 years ago, like back before Jerry was incredibly famous and back before Gary Shandling had a TV show. And like, so again, you might not know a lot of these comedians and that might not mean as much to you, but maybe, so maybe it's not worth you reading, but the lesson there is like that guy just like no teacher, no coach was ever going to be like, hey, you should go and try and interview all the best comedians right now, right? But he just made it happen. Yeah. And it was funny how people didn't say no. I had a teacher at Georgetown University who was he was the national security officer for Latin America, and so I know the NSA now has a bad rap, but at the time they were definitely doing spying, just nobody admitted it. But I was there studying diplomacy and international studies. Most of the kids I went to school with, or many of them went on to become spies, and so we were studying that stuff. And so when we would write papers in his class, he would say, all right, I don't want any secondary sources, meaning I don't want you to cite any books that cite an interview with somebody else. I want you to go interview the person. And we're like, okay, wait, we are undergraduate students at Georgetown University. Like, how are we going to interview, like the ambassador from Ecuador to the United States? And he's like, just ask him. And we're like, what? And he's like, they're all here in Washington, D.C. They're all one cab ride away. Just ask them. And so we did, and you would get these interviews. And so you'd be sitting in the room with like a government official from another country and be like, okay, can you tell me your opinion on the genocide that happened in 19... like, no offense, but But it was remarkable how many of those people were available there if you just asked, if you just took that initiative, if you just hustled, right? And yet nobody was going to put that on you. Nobody, like no one was going to say like, wake up in the morning and be like, you know what I think you should do? I think you should go meet the head of the Organization of American States today. You're like, and so I think there's so much of that it's available to you guys if you just push and make it. And by the way, the best way to get that meeting, any meeting like that, is to put yourself in the shoes of that person and like ask, okay, what matters to them? I get a few hundred emails a day. Most of them are incredibly poorly written. Most of them are like, can I just have a half hour of your time? So before they've said anything about why it'd be interesting to me, it'd be intriguing to me, the very first thing is, I just need a half hour of your time. Can I have your phone number? They put nothing in the body of it that's like, hey, this is why I think it'll be exciting for you. This is what I think you could learn. This is why I think you could make some money in this deal. This is why I think this is why it's related to something else I've heard you say before, or that I think is related to a project you've done, and I know this is a passion project of yours. Like if you let an email off to me with like blah blah blah, that's Tigraini, and I know you've traveled up there. Check this out. This many people in Tigray, would benefit from these kinds of bikes, and I can make them, and nobody else is doing this. Like, that email is going to get read. I'm not guaranteeing you that you and I are going to do business together, but that email is going to get read. If you're just like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur who has a really interesting idea. Can I just get a half hour of your time on the phone? Can we meet for coffee for an hour, right? Like, that just shows me you haven't put yourself in my shoes and thought about what my inbox looks like. Like, put yourself in the shoes of the person you're writing to. What is that, it's funny how often I see this across so many different industries. And so just think about it. I get inbound all day long. Most of it's crap, but there's some quality in there, and that quality has allowed me to make a really good living, right? There are gems in there. And so I have to build filters to sort through that. And the people were just like, hey, I've got, another thing that like you'll see in today's world, like ideas don't get backed. Like execution gets backed, right? And that's good because it no longer takes $5 million to start, right? You can often start with hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars. And there are more resources than ever for you to get that first few $100s or thousands of dollars. Or often you're going to start with goodwill. And so we don't back ideas, we back things that are actually working already. It doesn't mean it has to have 1 million users. I just like seeing that there are actual humans who like that thing. Yeah, well, that's exact. First of all, I like seeing that you're a doer, not a talker, right? So I like seeing that you have enough drive that you're able to get past because everyone has ideas. We've all been out drinking with your friends. And you're like, what would be really cool, man? Is if I could just push a button on my phone and a car comes and picks me up. That'd be awesome, right? Yeah. And we have so many people now who come out of the woodwork and be like, I had the idea for Uber 5 years ago. And I'm like, I'm sure you did. Like having a car pick you up is not like magic, and like to come up with the idea. It's actually hard to make work, right? It takes a lot of sweat to make that work. So when you show that you are the kind of person who has an idea, a good idea that we said at the intersection of all these different constituencies, and you are resourceful enough that you're like, look, I either code myself and or taught myself to code, or I know enough to find somebody to code it with me, or if it's not in a tech environment, I know a person, an engineer who can help me model this out or build the first CAD drawing, or I learned enough CAD to do it myself, or I'm able to find a manufacturer somewhere nearby that will be able to crank out the prototypes, or I was able to use the internet to find some place in China that can make it cheaper than any place on earth, and here's the prototypes, and I've actually taken the steps to make those. And I've shown that I have enough resolve to hire the first couple of people to work with me, to find a co-founder whose strengths are very complementary to mine, enough so that I've shown already we get along really well, and we know how to build stuff really well together. And so that is there's already so much risk taken out of it for an investor, right? Like, if you just come like, I got this great idea, it's all risk for me. Like, I don't know if you're a great person, if you've got great hustle. I don't know if this idea works because I haven't seen any humans use it yet. Like, I don't know if you're capable of getting something designed and built and manufactured at scale. I have no idea about any of this stuff. But if you bring me something that I can touch or that I can play with, or a site, and I can look at your analytics and be like, okay, even in the first couple of weeks, you've already got a few hundred people that are clicking on this thing, and I'm looking on, I always go to Twitter to see if anyone's talking about whatever you built or launched, because, like unfiltered feedback from real people saying like, oh, damn, this is amazing. Like, this saved my life, you know? Like, InVenture, you could just look at what people were posting on Facebook and Twitter about InVenture. Like, oh my God, InVenture is the most important thing. I can't believe it. Allowed me to grow my business, allowed me to do this, allowed me to do that. Like, we call that social proof. Like, social proof is so very telling. And so if you have something that's kind of out the gate already, then people can talk about it. And that really de-risks it, right? So now I'm less worried about all of that. I'm less worried about your hustle. I'm less worried about, are you the kind of person who can attract other people to work with you? Are you the kind of person who knows how to just pick up the phone and just keep talking until you get to the right person at the right company who can help you get that thing launched, right? Are you the kind of person who's just going to figure out how to get it permitted regulatorily or not? You know, it'd be way easy to sit back and be like, well, there's a bunch of taxi laws, and so I guess we probably can't start Uber. And then there's people who are like, well, hell, I can just go to the library and look up those taxi laws and make sure we do something that gets through the loopholes and works, right? As pissed off as the taxi companies are going to be. But that's that kind of resourcefulness. And so I think you have knowing the cultures you come from and the environments you come from, you have so many of these skills already, right? You can't just walk into a prefabricated, ready-to-go entrepreneurial experience for you. In fact, I have a feeling that many of your relatives are like, what the hell are you building? Like you come home and they're like, what? Like, like that happens all the time, right? Like, in fact, I'll give you a funny example I had some Australian entrepreneurs who came to the United States, built something cool that they sold to YouTube. And when we were in the negotiations about the deal, I, similarly to trying to develop your internal compass, I always say, before we react to somebody's offer, let's sit down as a team and as founders and write the offer that we would have wanted to see, right? So instead of just responding to somebody else's offer, what's the offer that matters to us? Not just the money, because that's not all that matters when you're selling your company. So are you proud of the buyer? Will you be proud to say these guys bought it? Are you willing to go work there for a few years, And there's a difference. Like, true entrepreneurs are sometimes like, shit, if I have to go have a job for 4 years, that's crazy. That's like jail. Like, I can maybe make it 1 year. Like, does it matter who your boss is to you? Some bosses, you're like, oh my gosh, that is the guy I'm going to go work for at that company, or the gal I'm going to go work for. I read the textbook she wrote when I was in college. I've always admired her. To work for her would be a privilege. I can't wait, right? Or you're just like, I've never liked this guy. And, I could probably suck it up for a couple years and work for him, but otherwise, like, I got to get out of there. There are so many different considerations. Is the company that buys, and this is mostly tech-centric still, but is the company that buys your company going to keep your product up and running, or are they going to kill it, right? That might matter a lot to you. Even though there's a lot of money on the table, you're like, look, I've built a community, I got all these users. Oh, did I hit battery issues? Thanks for looking out. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. Appreciate you looking out. If I don't have battery for the drive home, I don't know what I'll do with myself, right? Like if I had to sit in the back of the car and like have no, and I'd have to like look outside the windows. Can you imagine? Yeah. Yeah, it's right underneath there. Go for it. So anyway, I think. Wait, what story was I telling really quick? What was I telling?
Working for.
Oh yes, the Australian guys selling their company. So I sat down and I'm like, all right, guys, what matters? Like, what matters? Obviously, price matters. And it was funny. Google and Microsoft were both trying to buy this company. YouTube was part of Google, and the Microsoft was not an exciting place to work for these guys. And so they actually built an exchange rate. They said like, one Google dollar equals 1.5 Microsoft dollars. So that basically they would need a 50% higher offer to go work at Microsoft than what Google's was. So like, okay, we'll write that down. And we were going down the list, and one of the things they really, really wanted was, they said, when this company gets bought, and there was only 3 guys working in the company, they said, we want Google to issue a press release and put our individual names in it. And I was like, guys, that's weird. Google doesn't do that. And I was like, that's kind of like self-serving, self-promotional. And they're like, no, this really matters to us. And I was like, why does it matter to you? Like, you like want to brag to potential girlfriends that you sit, and they're like, no. And I was like, well, I'm not into it. And one of the guys was like, well, let me tell you why it matters to us. We were 3 geeks in a town in Australia who grew up together in a place where we were the kids who got beat up and pushed into the lockers. Our parents never understood what we did. They paid all this money to send us to school at Stanford and on the West Coast, and had no idea why we were doing that. and we really want to be able to send something home to our parents that they can print out and put on the refrigerator. And I was like, oh shit, that does matter, right? And so we go into the negotiation with Google, and we're like, all right, we're going to need this, and we're going to need their names in the press releases. And those guys are like, bullshit, nobody ever does that. We're not going to do that. And I was like, so these Australians, like, we went into this negotiation, and we were like, we need this, that. I was like, and we need their names in the press releases. And the guys at Google were like, no, we're not going to do that. And we're like, okay, we're out of here. And they're like, wait, you're willing to walk away from, a $15 million acquisition of this company because your names aren't in the press release? Are you serious? And we're like, yeah. And we told them why it mattered, and they could just smell that. Like, oh God, okay, yeah, well, and they did. You can find, it was called Omnisio, and you can find the press release with the 3 guys' names in it. But anyway, I just think knowing these things that matter to you, understanding what's most important to you, it reflects well. Think about all the way back when you first started like dating, right? So, like you're laughing, but think about like the first time you want to really ask a girl out. You're just like falling all over yourself. Like, I'm gonna write a poem. I'm gonna buy some candy. Whatever. Like oh yeah, you're like, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I did. But you're like, but that she smells a little desperation there, right? So she's not as interested, right? But if you walk up to somebody and without any conceit, without being cocky, you're like, I like you. I think it'd be cool to hang out. I'd love to go on a date, but but I could also just go hang out with my buddies on Friday. We were going to go do this thing anyway. Like, I'm not, there's no desperation there. I can definitely admit, like, I like you. I think you're great, and I respect you a lot, but I got options. Like, suddenly, on the other side of that transaction, somebody's like, oh shit, he's got choices. He's got like, there's options there. Like, okay, I got to dig into this, right? The rest of your business career is that same way. You can, there is this delicate balance where you can be bold about, your hustle, about the initiative you're taking, about how much value you bring to the table. And at the same time, you're making sure that that people know, like, you don't necessarily need that one thing. You don't have a single point of failure. You're not completely dependent upon them. And we're attracted to that in people, right? That goes across cultures, right? We are attracted to the people who could benefit from us but don't need us deeply, who aren't dependent upon us, who together with us would be better, but who wouldn't drag us down and who wouldn't just pull all our resources off us, right? You think about that in friendships, relationships, business, that's who it is. And so that's how 3 guys from Australia who were total geeks were able to walk into a negotiation with YouTube and just be like, our name's got to be in the press release or we're out of here. And I think Google wasn't used to being talked to like that, right? And it wasn't because like, yo, we're cocky and I want to get famous for this. It was because this is what matters to me, so I'm going to be honest and candid with you about it, and these are where my values are, and if you can't get your values aligned with mine, we're not going to have a deal there. And I think if you live your life with that kind of code, you will find yourself exceptionally successful, and you'll find yourself in much healthier relationships personally and work-wise, right? When there's that mutual benefit and respect and lack of dependency, that's when you'll find that, the very best negotiators in the world, I have found, are my engineers who aren't actually good bullshitters. Because, so what we do, we go down and we're like, okay, what do we need? What do we need? And then I actually put them in the room, and they're not like, they don't have a big presentation, they're not any wavy bullshit. They just know what for them matters and what doesn't. And the bullshit guys on the other side of it are just completely flustered by it. They're like, like when Travis Kalanick, who's an engineer, was being, he wasn't our original CEO at Uber. He was being promoted to be CEO, and I had to negotiate his deal. And it was very early, and Travis said, okay, I was like, all right, how much of the company are you going to need? And Travis said, 23%. I was like, okay, that's a lot. So tell me how you get to that number. And he's like, that's just the number. And I was like, all right, but what math did you use? Like what, like how'd you? And he's like, no, there's no math. That's the number. I was like, I remember exactly where I was standing too. I was like in a parking lot of a Home Depot in West Sacramento. And I was like, holy, he's real about that. And I was just like, where do I go? How do I negotiate just a number that just came out of thin air? And he was just so confident that that was the number and then I'm just like, okay, anything I say now is almost like a rejection of the founder, CEO that we really want. It made me uncomfortable. He got 23%. He's worth like $5 or $6 billion on paper now. And so anyway, that's I think having that kind of internally driven confidence, not cockiness, but just that confidence, will go a long, long way. I have this principle I call bold humility. So I think a lot of business books, like Jack Welch books and stuff like that, will try and teach you to be humble at all cost, right? But I don't actually think that being humble all the time is a natural state for kick-ass people, right? Each of you got here because you're special in some way. Each of you got here because you're better at something than your peers, right? You are standouts in each of your countries. I mean, you aren't just the 25 best from, Kenya. You're the 25 best from, and part of this 500-person group from across that entire continent. You have distinguished yourselves in all of these different ways, whether it's through entrepreneurship, academics, leadership, nonprofits, government work. You represent an incredibly small group of distinguished people that have set you apart. And so you shouldn't apologize for that, right? You shouldn't have to talk down the stuff that made you that special, right? If you're a kick-ass engineer, you shouldn't have to apologize for it. If you've built a successful business, you shouldn't have to pretend you didn't and talk it down. I ruffle some people's feathers sometimes because I do not apologize for having the most successful venture fund in history. I will subtly remind the people who didn't invest in me the first time around. But together, in conjunction with that, where we get screwed up as a leader, or we get screwed up as a young manager, is we feel that we have to carry that across every aspect of our life, and our business life, and our personal life. And that we're very afraid to show there are things we're not the best at, because we think that'll make us look weaker. Back at Google, I created a division that ultimately bid $4.7 billion on wireless spectrum. It was this huge, huge thing. But when I created it, I didn't actually have any employees who formally reported to me. So Google had this system called management without authority. And so people were allowed to dedicate, engineers, product people were allowed to dedicate their time to the projects that they felt were most interesting. But you had to attract them to that, right? You had to attract them by making them feel valuable and by making them feel like you were working on something important. And we're working on satellite spectrum initiatives, satellite internet for Africa. We were working on these things called the TV white space, 700 megahertz. We were working on the one laptop per child stuff. We were working on access for the planet, basically. And so at Google, we have this tradition where there's always two screens like this. One had the slides that we were talking about, and one had the notes of the meeting being taken in real time. And the note taker was the most important person in the meeting. They weren't a secretary, they were an executive. And they're taking the notes, and the notes, as people are talking, the notes are going up there. And the reason we did that was for transparency, accountability, and it was also at the end of the meeting, you press publish, and the notes would be shared with anyone in the company who wanted to read them. And so people who weren't at your meeting could follow your notes. And they could see, is this an interesting project, is this worthwhile, et cetera. So we were in a meeting once about these projects, and we got to a point where my partner in the project, she was a note taker, she was an executive a long time there, she could tell I was making it up. I didn't actually know the answer, but I didn't want to admit I didn't know the answer, right? And so she wrote in the notes, Chris doesn't know what to do about this. And she published the notes. I didn't see it till later. I was still talking, I didn't see it till later. And I was like, wait, Larry Page reads those notes every day. I mean, we had a big fight. I'm like, you just ruined my career. You just showed everyone I don't know what the hell to do about this thing, right? I was really upset with her. And the next week at the meeting, we had maybe 8 or 9 additional people show up who, by their background, had worked at wireless companies and knew the answer to that question. And suddenly I was like, wait, admitting I needed help, which I didn't do voluntarily, someone admitting for me that I needed help just made me more powerful. It just got me all these people who are willing to work for me and willing to work on this project and get done the stuff we need to get done, and I didn't actually have to, they don't even report to me. I'm not even the one paying their salary or anything like that. I'm not even their boss. And yet they're just here voluntarily because they know they can be helpful. And so this principle, bold humility, is don't apologize for the things where you know you're the very best, where you know you did them not by accident, by sheer drive, hustle, ambition, talent, But at the same time, know where that line stops, where you're not the best at something, and then don't be afraid to candidly ask for that help there. Because everyone in the world wants to feel helpful. That is one common thread through all of humanity, is everyone here wants to feel like they help somebody, right? I mean, that is your parents and grandparents, the kids you know. Like, it is a fundamental thing you will see on the playground with children. Like, if they think they can be helpful, they feel so accomplished, right? Watch how teachers interact with young kids. Like, can somebody help me do this thing that I know I'm perfectly capable of doing on my own, but like a kid will walk up and proudly do it and be like, I threw that in the trash. Like, and they just feel helpful, right? They feel accomplished. But that continues all the way through adults. I have CEOs who are incredible at hiring very, very good people around them. People who could probably have the CEO job, and yet the CEO who hires them isn't threatened by that. They know that by hiring the very best person to work for them, they're going to be that much more capable. I have other CEOs who hire weak people around them because they're like, well, I don't want anyone making a play on my job, right? And the company suffers as a result. And so it's a huge leadership lesson that I think, like, across whatever you do, like, just be willing to ask for help. And that's one of the ways you can position yourself to get a meeting with somebody who's way out of your league, is just say, look, I'm trying to solve a specific problem. When I get an email that says, can I have an hour of your time for life advice? You're like, shit. But when I have somebody write and say, look, by the way, I went to Georgetown too, I'm a Georgetown alum, that's not usually enough to get a reply from me, but I'm struggling with, I feel like I'm like you, like I want to get into technology, but I'm struggling with whether law school is the right thing for me to do. I'm like, I got a couple lines of response to that really quick, Like, I feel like I can be helpful to that person. I know specifically what they're working on. If I get somebody who's like, look, here's a situation with my company, and I'm not really sure, like, do I need to add an independent board member right now, or, I don't know if I want to sell this thing right now. Even if I'm not invested, if somebody's like, I've got this offer, but it doesn't feel right to me, I'm like, I can write a couple sentences on why, what they should do, et cetera. Because it's teed up, right? It shows that empathy, that I put myself in that situation. I like to feel helpful. Even with people where I don't have a direct monetary interest, I want to feel like I gave them a hand, right? If somebody comes to me and is like, look, I've got a really cool thing, and I really think Scott Harrison at Charity Water would be interested in it because this and this and this, and I think we can have impact on these people, like, I'd love to make that introduction, right? But if somebody's just like, hey man, can I just pick your brain? Like, first of all, that is the weirdest phrase ever, but I get those all the time. And there's a guy named Paul Graham who founded this thing called Y Combinator. And Paul wrote about the cost of a cup of coffee. And what it wasn't about like how much the cup of coffee actually, cost, but he's like, for me to like leave my house or my office, travel there, sit down with you, like try and get this cup of coffee and talk with you for an hour and then go back to me. Like, he's like, I can maybe do 3 or 4 of those in a day, and yet I haven't accomplished anything, right? And so I reserve that for the people that I want to deeply invest in. I told you, like, we have the house next door to our house up here, and we have those people come up, and so the people that I do work with, the people that are my real friends, or the people I want to be deeper friends with, we have them come stay in our house. Like, you're not going to do better diligence on somebody than having them stay in your house. In fact, there's one person we did not do business with because after dinner he did not lift a finger to do dishes. And I'm like, I just made the whole damn meal. Like, you're going to do some dishes, right? Like, just be a guest. And so it just tells you so much about people. But I would much rather reprioritize that time to go deeper in fewer relationships than just have a bunch of like, hey, let's meet up for coffee. You good? You good? Yeah. So. Anyway.
So you've been very gracious with your time. I think the battery running out is probably a signal. We've got a bookload of questions that these guys would still like to ask, but I'd like to, if you have time, maybe two more.
Okay.
So I want to circle back to this idea of ethics and integrity and doing things the right way, and I think that's an important ethos. But can you sort of contrast that ethos with also being a hustler and trying to get things done, and where is that line in the sand?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, and this, by the way, this is one of the reasons I like studying liberal arts, is because I think you get a chance to like monkey around with philosophy and ethics, and you get to test some of these questions, right? And I think those are always still fun books to read and debates to get into with your friends. I think you look at downstream impacts of stuff, and so there's, for those of you who didn't go to class as much, you're like, who's harmed by that, right? So, but for those of you who are like stealing or preying upon, someone who's impoverished or tricking them into borrowing money they can't afford or something like that, like you should feel ashamed of that. And so, there are rules that are there, like the taxi cab protection rules are just complete bullshit, right? They are built by a cartel who is self-serving, and they have bought off politicians. So consumers don't benefit from those rules. Like, if you're in a black neighborhood in this country, you cannot get picked up in a cab. Like, if you're a black man standing in in Madison Avenue in the heart of New York City, you are not going to get picked up in a cab, right? And yet they have completely entrenched protection for this system. They're not available when it's raining, and so you're just like, shit, this is when I actually need a cab, right? And so it was all built to, these are rules that have no real foundational ethic behind them at all. And so along comes Uber and is like, look, the Uber system doesn't know if you're white or black or a man or a woman. They just need to pick you up. And if drivers turn down too many rides in a row, then they're kicked off the system, right? So anywhere in the city you request a ride, you're going to get a ride. You have to, or that driver is no longer eligible for the system. Obviously I just said the behavior on the system is a lot better. Like when it's raining, the Uber drivers are out there because the price starts to surge and there's a market there. So it starts asking you, how badly do you need a ride? Are you willing to pay double? But at least if you desperately need a ride, there's going to be a car there. And so this market has actually solved this problem that has gotten past some of these crazy laws, but the laws behind them had no public purpose, right? We see that every city that launches Uber has a dramatic decline in drunk driving because the cars are available, they're easy, they're safe. So you're like, well, I've had a few drinks, instead of driving, I should take this home now. Or you just start your night in an Uber now because you're just like, I know I'm going to go out and have a bottle of wine. I won't drive anymore. And so there's so much public benefit that you don't feel bad about breaking those rules, right? And so I think there's some real opportunity there to kind of ask yourself, is this a rule that is there because it serves a politician or an entrenched interest, or a lobbyist who bought off our government here? Or is this a rule that actually protects a group of people who wouldn't be protected otherwise, right? So, one of the things that Uber has had to develop recently is the original Uber platform didn't have options for handicapped riders, really. And so there weren't wheelchair accessible vans in the Uber platform, right? But there are laws about that, and there's good laws for a reason. People who are riding wheelchairs should be able to call cabs like anybody else, and they should be able to call Ubers like anybody else. And so Uber is evolving its business to provide those kinds of services in all its territory. That's important, right? And that's a rule that behind it is some purpose you should feel good about, and so that should exist on the platform. And so I think, knowing the nature of governments in so many of your cultures, and knowing how new some of those governments are, knowing how corrupt some of it can be in the officials you come across, I think you will feel comfortable not playing by some of those rules sometimes. And I think other times you'll be like, this rule exists for a reason, because the people in the rural part of this country aren't going to be protected otherwise, right? The people who don't have a voice, the people who've never even registered to vote, or the people who, in a country where we don't have voting, et cetera, or the people who can't read aren't going to understand the impact this has on them. I mean, we go back to InVenture, doing the lending to the people in Kenya and Tanzania, and 5 more countries coming really soon in Africa. But traditionally, lenders have tried to squeeze every dollar of profit out of the person they're lending to, right? But that's not actually good for the long-term health of the business. It's not good for a lender if you go broke, if you default. Not only might they lose that money on that existing transaction, but they're going to lose you as a long-term customer. The best business for a lender is to lend you only the amount of money that you can pay back, such that you had a good experience and you're going to come back again and borrow from them again, right? And so the very best borrower is somebody who borrows again and again and again for years and years and years. That's the best. And so if you can build a system where you know that they're actually capable of paying you back and they're not spending more than they should, then that's the healthiest business ever, right? And so, but you've seen that's never been the case. Like in the United States mortgage system, we had this crash in 2008 and 2009 because they're like, I'll loan you whatever the hell you want, right? And then I'll sell that loan to somebody else, and the whole system came crashing down. It wasn't good for anybody. And so, Shivani's company can actually tell whether she can even tell whether you have a long commute and whether you should probably have a bicycle, And so if you say hey, I want to borrow some money for a bicycle, she'd be like, that's a good investment for you. I can tell that will make you you'll be able to pay that back. You'll be able to get to work faster, et cetera, and you'll be a better customer for me in the future, right? But if she's just out there trying to loan as much money as possible to people, it's just a really unhealthy business. And so I think there are opportunities for you to not apologize for being a capitalist, or not apologize for making money, but just think about what are the downstream effects of that business. And so I'm going to make a lot of money from Style Seat, but I'm also going to be very proud that this company, founded by a woman that serves mostly women, half of whom are black women, is empowering this entire generation of women to build and run and own their own businesses, to manage their own clientele, to not be beholden to a salon, to be able to take that business wherever they want to go. A lot of these women are just working out of their homes now. You know, one of the things Style Seat is working on is helping some of these independent business women finance the cost of supplies for braids or weave, because that's expensive, right? Like, and again, this is something I never knew, but like, you go to get that kind of treatment, that stuff costs money. Sometimes you have to get it from the customer ahead of time, go get it, because a lot of the women who are working out of their house don't have working capital to have those kind of supplies. So what if I knew that you were an incredibly successful stylist working out of your home, your customers kept coming back to you, and even though you're not rich, et cetera, I just know you're trustworthy. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to loan you the money to go out and buy those supplies, so that now you can just have a customer come in and pay you directly. They don't have to pay you ahead of time. I know you're going to be able to grow your business. I'm going to get paid on that, right? And I'm going to feel good about it. And I'm not going to apologize for making profit on it, because you're going to be grateful to me as someone, you know, I've empowered you to grow your business. And I think you can use these principles across everything you do. Like, I know a lot of you are too young to have kids already, but that, I think, is one of these things. Or a lot of you do?
Most of them.
3? I'm going to have 3 really soon. In a month, I'm going to have 3. I have 2 little ones now. We're going to have 3. I'm going to have 4, and I'm going to have 3 kids under 4 by the end of the month. Oh, man. So,
God bless Crystal.
Anyway, but I'm sure then specifically you're able to look through the lens of, would I be proud to tell my kids this is what I do for a living, right? Is this, you know, am I proud, like, when they ask me, like, so how do we make this money? Like, how did you become a boss? What do you do for a living? Even if they can't quite grasp yet, you know, like, it is hard to explain to a 3-year-old what venture capital is. Although any of you follow me on Periscope see they do the morning stock report sometimes, so my kids get in my lap. I think it's really important for girls to have financial literacy, even if they don't become business women. I just want them to be able to speak that language. And so literally we check the stocks every morning, and they know the difference between red and green, and whether they're making money or losing money, and it's hilarious. A few hundred people tune in because it's just funny to see these cute little girls doing that. So, but I want to be able to tell them with pride how we made money. You know, I want to be able to tell them with pride what we do for a living. You know, even if that's small. Like, my wife quit her big advertising career, and now she's a book designer, and she designs scratch and sniff books for adults. Like, she had a New York Times bestseller as a scratch and sniff wine book. So how to learn about wine by scratch and sniff. You know, and it's hilarious. But I'm really proud of her, and our kids are really proud of her. They know mom makes books, right? Like, they don't change the world, and they don't generate a ton of money or anything like that. But it's really, you got to feel really proud to put something creative out in the world like that. And so I think across all of your enterprises, that should be something. You know, I don't want to criticize anyone who, like, works for Coca-Cola or something like that, because I realize there are amazing opportunities to get a job like that sometimes that can pull you up by your bootstraps and put you in a position later to be your own entrepreneur. But I am not the kind of person who could work at Coca-Cola knowing the effects that sugar have on kids right now, on obesity and the crisis that's coming, they lead to worse attendance, you know, sugar leads to worse attendance in school, underachievement, stunts growth, all these things that we know. Like, I actually think eventually sugar will be regulated as a drug, because we know how bad sugar is for us. So, you know, and so if my kids are like, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm like, I sell sugary sodas to kids in schools everywhere. You know, like, that's not a job I could do. That would be hard for me to get up in the morning and get passionate about it. I have friends who work at those companies, and they're excited when they come up with a new beverage and a new angle for it and stuff like that. But I want to just be much prouder of what I do at the end of the day. And so, I don't know. All right, that was a 20-minute answer to one question.
Well, so I have a lot of questions up here that you guys all have submitted, but I think at this point in time, let's take
let's do some
Chris's
live.
lead here.
Yeah,
why don't you guys ask some questions, and we'll go from there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a friend from South Africa actually who's watching.
Oh, cool.
He asked me to ask a question. question on her behalf.
Cool.
So she's in social finance, social financing, and she said I should ask you, what businesses are you keen on investing in that you see are not being built?
Well, so that's my point is I probably don't know those businesses. I think you do, right? And your friend in South Africa, and I think each of you do. Like oftentimes we get pitched these things where I didn't realize that was an issue. A week ago on Twitter, I posted this series of things I had said no to. Like Airbnb, that's a $20 billion company. I was one of the very first people to see Airbnb, and when I saw it, to see the pitch, it was a tiny company. They showed me, and I was like, I don't know, you guys, like this sounds dangerous to me. Like sleeping in somebody else's house while they're still there. I was like, I think somebody's gonna get murdered or something like that, And so I said no. I probably missed out on hundreds of millions of dollars as a result, and it was because I'd forgotten that. I'm ashamed by it, but I now embrace this. That like, at our heart, people are good. Like people are good. You just know this, right? Like, yes, there are criminals. Yes, there are bad people, but at scale, people want to do the good thing. And if you give them an opportunity to be good to each other, they almost always are. Now, if that opportunity is anonymous, they can be nasty, right? So you see comments on YouTube videos that are just nasty, right? Hiding behind a screen name. Twitter can get nasty sometimes, right? But you can see in certain communities when it's a face and like, oh, you're in my house, so you certainly know my identity, and I know your rating as an Airbnb user. It turns out people are really nice to each other. And so what's interesting is like, I missed out on lots of money. Recently I was pitched another deal in a similar space where people were letting other folks use their houses. And the other people I was with who were getting pitched were like, no, that sounds like a bad idea. And I was like, I made that mistake once. And I asked the founders, and they said, 43% of the people who put their houses into this program say their house is cleaner when they get back than it was when they left it, right? And they say, and only 1% of the use cases have ever complained about something, wrong with the house or something like that. People are good. And so, but we're often kind of blind to that, right? I said no to Dropbox, which is a $15 billion company, because I thought Google was going to crush them. I said no to Snapchat because I was like, wait, isn't that just how you send naked pictures to other people? And I just totally ignored the whole big market opportunity. And I didn't even ask my business partner, Matt, who was already using it for non-naked pictures. Like he was using it to follow news and to communicate. I didn't even stop to get out of my own bubble and ask about that. And so, there are these businesses that make things incredibly cheap. And I told you, I'm just not as sensitive to cost right now. I'm in a different station in my life where I don't pay attention to the price, but real people working for real dollars do. And I've lost touch with that a little. As much as I try and put myself in their shoes, I sometimes, and so I have to be more academic about it and be like, okay, what is, a working class person in the United States spend their money on? Where does it go? What are their anxieties? But, you as a founder are close to that. Here's a great example. Almost all of the people setting policy in this country right now have no student loans, right? So college in the United States is incredibly expensive. You borrow all this money to go, you can leave school with $100,000, but you don't have any student loans. And by the way, the rules around student loans in the United States is you can't declare bankruptcy. They never go away. They hang around you forever. And the interest rates are really high, despite the fact that they're guaranteed by the federal government. The interest rates are incredibly high. And so they're very, very expensive. But the people who set policy, whether it's at Congress, whether it's in your companies, et cetera, they forget about student loans. It's just not, and so everybody in this country who's like 21 to 35 has it front of mind because like, shit, it's like paying a mortgage for a house I don't own, right? But the people who actually, and so if you can come up with a crazy alternative to student loans, it's probably not on the radar of any of these other people, right? And so talk about social finance. So, yes, there are big banks that will loan you lots of money. They have many rules for loaning you money, but there's a lot of great finance power in us lending each other money, right? I mean, one of the most successful companies in the country now is called Lending Club, where, have you seen this in the United States? It's an interesting model. You go as a person and you pitch yourself like as a borrower, like here's who I am, here's the school I went to or the school I want to go to, here are my accomplishments, I was in the Boy Scouts, or I was, a successful soccer player in my high school. I volunteer at my church. Here are my references. Here's the thing. I need to borrow $3,000 for this community college. Will you back me? I'm willing to pay you, 4% interest, which is much cheaper than a traditional student loan, but, I'm going to pay you this kind of interest. And normal people can go make a loan, to help that, or even a portion of a loan, like a little bit of a loan to help that person get to school. You've seen this with Kickstarter, right? That was I was one of the first investors in Kickstarter. So Kickstarter has allowed you to now not have to raise lots and lots of venture capital and give up a piece of your company, but just say, here's a product I'm working on, and I built a prototype, or I can get to a prototype if you each chip in, and here's some benefit for you. I'll put your name on it or whatever. And so that's social finance as well, right? And that's amazing. It's revolutionized how this stuff happens. We're starting to see more and more crowdfunding of money for startups here, where you can angel invest even if you're not a person who has a ton of money. I'm worried about it. I think it'd be scary. I think there's a lot of money for everyday investors to potentially lose there. But it has traditionally been illegal for your friends, if they're not already rich, to put money into your startup in the United States. That's weird, right? So, they're the people who back you most. They're the people who know you most, whether you're capable of doing it. It'd be nice for them to be able to put $500 in your startup, but that's traditionally been illegal. So that got fixed recently, and so that's pretty amazing. But ultimately, the companies that are being founded are probably founded by people like you with very unique perspectives that people like me don't know about. And the most successful people like me are people who are willing to listen to people like you and try and put ourselves in your shoes and understand something that may not fix my problem. Like, there's 5 Uber for yachts, for big boats, right? Because venture capitalists love boats, right? And there's always an attempt at Uber for private jets, right? And they all fail, by the way, because it's not a good business. But venture capitalists, all like private jets, and so, but where the money is, where the big opportunity is in all of these businesses that you know about that I don't, right? Like when I met Shivani at InVenture, I'll tell you, this is a great humility story. I was at the TED conference. You guys, I'm sure, watch TED Talks and stuff. And it was dinner with a speaker night. And there were all these famous speakers that I wanted to meet and sit at their table. But I got stuck talking to somebody on the way to the dinner, and so I got stopped. And by the time I got there, all the speakers I admired, their tables were full. And I was so jealous, too. They were like, Dan Ariely, who writes these great statistical and social behavior books, was like telling a great story, and everyone's laughing. I'm like, oh man, I wanted to be at that table. And so I'm looking for where to sit, and I told you, she's this small Indian woman, and she's sitting next to a flag, so Shivani Saroya, and she's all alone at this table. And I'm like, oh man, I'd be a jerk if I didn't go sit down there, right? But I had all this self-interest, I wanted to meet these famous people and talk to them. I'm like, okay, well, so I sit down, I'm like, hi, I'm Chris, what's your name? Shivani. Shivani, what do you do? The next thing I know, it's 2.5 hours later, I have not eaten any of the food that has been set down in front of me. Other people have come and gone from the table, and I may have turned and been like, hey, what's going on? Back to this conversation. I was so fascinated by what she was doing. I was so fascinated by the market she was addressing, what she was capable of doing with the software, how she taught herself to code, all of this hustle. And she'd never raised venture capital. She hadn't even been thinking about it. I would not have met her otherwise. And yet I was so drawn in by, this is a whole world I don't know anything about. I got back to my house that night. It was back when Ted was in Long Beach still, and I got to my LA house at 11:30 that night, and I kept my wife up for an hour and a half talking about this thing. And I was just like, you have no idea, check it out, blah, 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 blah. And it was just, I never would have known about that. I never would have known about that market. I've now read 6 books on M-Pesa, that I wouldn't have known anything really about, right? So yeah, go ahead.
Can I start by saying, before you came here, I was really scared, this billionaire is coming here, venture capitalist. As an entrepreneur, most times you don't get to meet people like you. So this has been an experience that you guys are not so bad after all.
Oh, thank you, man. Where are you from?
I'm from Zimbabwe.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So you mentioned that your wife was very influential in one of the decisions you made to invest in a company. Is this the kind of thing that you do a lot of the time, or are you quick to look at logic and key performance indicators and stuff? We hear that investors actually invest in people, not ideas. Is that true, and how far do you take that?
Well, remember, so first of all, I don't make an investment decision without my wife. And so, because not listening to her has cost me a lot of money. Another Pinterest, Pinterest is a huge company now, right? I saw Pinterest. I had a woman working for me, a young woman, and I was like, bring me deals that you think I wouldn't, see. She brought me Pinterest. The founder reached out. I just published this in my tweets like last week. You can see the actual email he wrote me. Ben Silberman being like, we really want to work with you as an investor. And I remember looking at it and be like, I don't know, man. I was like, a friend of mine, Sukhinder Singh, who's one of the best executives I worked with at Google, left Google to run a thing called Polyvore that was very similar to Pinterest. I'm like, if Sukhinder can't do it, if she can't do it, who can do it? And I'm like, I don't know, I don't really get it. It looks all jumbled the way it's designed and stuff like that. And so I passed, right? Like that cost me hundreds of millions of dollars. And like my wife was like, you passed? She's like, do you know how much shit I pin all the time? Yeah, I mean, just those things have cost me. I will say that as much as I thought the Pinterest design was all jumbled, I later went on, I was meeting with this entrepreneur. He was really crazy. I was like, so what was your background? He's like, well, I was the first designer at Pinterest. I'm like, done. Okay, come work for me. I'm not going to make that. Like, you know something about human beings that I don't know. And like, that looks jumbled to me. Like, do you know Pinterest? Like, I don't know, like, am I supposed to read across or down and up and kind of like, but obviously hundreds of millions of people do. So anyway, I was like, you got to come, we got to do some business. But as a seed stage investor, there isn't a lot of, there aren't a lot of KPIs and stuff to invest in, right? There aren't like big financials, right? The person can put in the deck, like, here's what I think it could be worth. That's all mumbo jumbo, right? So you have very few indicators. As we talked about earlier, like, I hope you have a site up and going. I hope you have a prototype of your product. I hope you have a business I can try. I think that's important. Like with Uber, even though we didn't have a whole marketplace of cars, what we did was Garrett, the founder, one of the co-founders of Uber, just rented a car out with a driver from a fleet. So he had it, and he just made it so that his friends as well as some potential investors could just use it. So he gave the app to like 25 people. And sometimes you'd have to wait longer because you're like, oh man, my buddy's using it, taking it over this party or whatever. And by the way, it was a limo. It was pretty cheesy. So like you'd pull up with your friends, the limo pulls up. And so it was tangible. We could touch it, right? At that point, the revenue was like zero because he wasn't charging anyone to use it in the very beginning. The costs were high because he was renting somebody else's car, but he could tell a story about this is solving a real problem. The drivers love it. The riders love it. Jesus, people move in every country, in every city. People are paying taxis. And he also was able to tell a story, by the way, about how the market isn't just the taxi market. It grows the market. Once you use Uber a few times, you stop driving yourself. Right now we have a thing called Uber Pool, which is cheaper than public transportation. And so you stop buying a car. And so it's a bigger market than just the cab market. It actually changes transportation forever. So he's able to tell that story. But at the heart of it, I'm investing in Travis and Garrett and Ryan. There's a story I wrote up on my site about Travis and playing a Nintendo Wii tennis. You know the Nintendo Wii?
It's a great story.
You saw that story? Yeah. So Travis was staying at our house in Truckee over the holidays, and my dad was there, and my dad likes to play like Nintendo Wii. I got him one once, and he thought he's pretty good at the tennis thing. You guys played this game, like you swing the little racket around or the little stick. And so he's like, Travis, let's play a game. Come on, so he challenges Travis. And I think it was New Year's Day. I think Travis was like a little like hungover. And so he's just sitting on our couch. He's like, okay, I'll play. And they go to play, and Travis is like barely playing, and yet he's still beating my dad. It's close, but he's beating my dad. My dad's like, what the hell? My dad's standing up and swinging like this. And so anyway, after a few games, Travis is like, hey, Mr. Sacca, I got to tell you, I got to be honest, I'm not left-handed. And so he takes it and puts it in his other hand, like that movie Princess Bride, right? He takes it and puts it in his other hand. And then my dad never scores a point again. And my dad is really pissed off. He's like, what is going on here? And Travis is like, well, Mr. Sacca, I'll show you something. And he uses it to navigate to the menu on the screen, and he shows the worldwide leaderboard, and Travis is number 2 in the world at Wii Tennis while running Uber. Like that is someone with a level of obsession and competitiveness that you aren't going to find, maybe only in the number 1 player, right? But that is an incredible type of personality to back. Travis will never lose, right? He will out-hustle everybody. That guy, despite the fact he's worth $5 and change billion on paper, he travels with a backpack about this small and stays in hostels because he thinks it helps him stay in touch with with people and get perspectives on like, okay, like I know how to market to rich people, but what about youth, you know, who have very little money to spend, need to get around the city? I'm competing for their bus fare right now. So how can I get a level of service in place that can take some of their bus fare and get them even happier because they can ride around in a car now, right? And so it's fascinating. But I'm like I said, I'm looking for those people who help me understand that their success is inevitable. I'm looking for those people who I've seen have come from circumstances that show that they will not take a day or two setback as like real, right? That when this thing fails the first time, they know they can out back out of it again. That they will not feel beat down and get totally depressed about it. That they have resilience, you know? They know what ups and downs are really like. I'm looking for these people that have shown me they can attract other people, that they can bring people and get them fired up to work with them. I'm looking for people who can tell a story, because you got to be able to tell a story to your users. You got to be able to tell a story to advertisers or to people who are going to pay you. You got to be able to tell a story to investors, to employees, to recruits, to people who are going to buy you or another company that you're going to buy. You have to be an effective storyteller. And if you can't tell an effective story when we sit down, then you've just shown, like, I think there's a low likelihood that you're going to succeed. And so all of these things, you know, even like you name the most successful people in business and they have these elements there. So anyway, I'll do 2 more questions. Sorry. Yeah.
My name is Rashida and I'm from Ghana. I would like to know, my question is very simple. I would like to know the 3 important lessons that you've learned as in business and in entrepreneurship.
Okay, I hope I covered a lot of what those lessons are here, but is Ghana, is that the Ashanti?
Yes.
Yeah, I took a class on Ashanti in college. It was a long time ago though, so I just want to make sure. Sorry, I would have written a shorter letter if I had more time. You know.
Yeah.
In fact, by the way, that same professor who used to make us go interview people, you know, first-person interviews, he would have us write a 10-page paper. So we'd turn in the 10-page paper, and he'd say, you know, and you'd put all this work into it, it'd be great, and he'd be like, look, I'm the National Security Officer of Latin America. I'm an incredibly important person. I don't have time to read your 10-page paper. Give me back a 3-page paper. And you're like, oh, son of a, because then you have to like take this thing and edit out all these words you're really proud of. You're like, okay, what matters? And so you're like, okay, I have to do this 3-page paper. And you turn it in, and he's like, who do you think you are? There's 20 students in this class, and I got to read 3 pages. He's like, come back with a 1-page paper. And you're like, what? Like, and then you give it back to you, and he'd say, okay, and by the way, you have 1 more week to turn it into, there's a type of writing called E-prime, where you don't use any linking verbs, so no forms of the verb to be. And he'd say, like, I'll give you an extra half-letter grade if you bring me back a paper that's 1 page long with no form of the verb to be in it. So, like, I feel like I played those games already. They made me a better writer, but I'm not. But
well,
anyway.
we actually do that with a 30-page business plan. You have to turn it into a 1-page business canvas. So we've done some of that. In
So
here.
one of the lessons I think I've learned is never to underestimate anybody. And this comes in so many different forms, right? And it doesn't mean everybody's awesome, you know, but one of those forms that you guys will find is that psychologically, when somebody speaks with a foreign accent and English isn't their first language, we underestimate them. You know, we just do, right? So somebody from China sits down, you know, in your office and starts telling you about something. It is easy to forget they're an amazing genius with multiple degrees in computer science who's built because they have halting English. It's just a temptation. It's a biological temptation of ours. Like, if they can't find the right words, like our biology tells us, well, they must have a slow brain, right? And so that's one example linguistically, but I think it's also very easy to underestimate somebody's experience. So, you know, when I got hired by Google, I'd only worked at this company called Spidera that nobody's ever heard of. So Google, I think a lot of people at Google were tempted to hire folks from Yahoo and Microsoft and these names they knew. But those people had worked in big companies, had very specific responsibilities, didn't understand the overall company strategy. And so when they got to Google, they weren't actually really effective entrepreneurial employees because they had such particular focus, right? Like at Spidera, we were a company of 30 people powering 2% of the world's internet. We didn't have a receptionist because we were so lean. So if you were the one closest to the door, you were the receptionist that day, like in addition to doing your real job. And because we were so small that, you know, if we needed to make the quarterly sales figures, like the CEO would be like, okay, stop your job today and get on the phone and sell some stuff, right? And if we needed to change data centers, like everybody in the company would come late and move servers literally in the backs of our cars from one data center to the other, and they would teach us how to config those and get our service back online. And so what happened was I got to Google, and I was one of the most effective startup type and entrepreneurial employees, there in my peer set, because I'd worked in this company where I'd gotten exposure to all these different roles, right? It would have been very easy, and a lot of people did dismiss me because they're like, what the hell, Spadera? And yet I think like that was what made me valuable to Google. And so I have just learned to not underestimate people. I mean, we'd still do it. It's still very tempting. It still happens automatically. You still do it with bias. You do it not even realizing you do it, right? Do it around gender, you do it around race, you do it around age. It's really easy to underestimate young people, right? Even as you're relative young people, you look one generation down, it's really easy to underestimate them. And so I think that's one thing that has cost me a lot of money, probably friendships, has like cost me a lot of time, because I bet you I could have hired better people if I didn't underestimate them. So that's a piece of advice. Who else has a question? Sure, on the camera.
Okay, I'm Rudi from Congo, DRC in Central Africa. I'm happy to hear that you have invested in Ethiopia. So what's the biggest challenge you faced while investing in Ethiopia? And what lesson can we learn from that as a young African leader?
Yeah, well, so my investments in Ethiopia are all just with charity water and this nonprofit stuff, right? So, but they do feel like investments because we're moving millions and millions of dollars there. So a couple of things. And by the way, it's a tough business climate, right? So as an outsider coming in, I would feel really like I need a strong local partner to help me navigate that. Somebody who can really help me understand the risks. And so one of the reasons why Ethiopia has been an amazing place for charity water to do business is not only are there a lot of deserving people who need clean water, they're all over Africa and Asia, et cetera, but there we have this partner in Tigray called REST, the Relief Society of Tigray, that are all former soldiers from the war with Eritrea who are just badasses. Like, they know how to get stuff done. And so when we were like, look, we want to bring clean water and we can bring the resources, we have this partnership there with these people who they have incredible work ethic, they have incredible drive, they are not daunted by failure at any point. And that's why we're at the point where like we've kind of run out of places to drill wells in Tigray. It's like saturated with good access to clean water. And it's a result of having the best local partners on the ground. So there are multiple countries across Africa that could use that same kind of infusion of capital. But if we don't find a kick-ass partner on the ground, we can't do it ourselves. You can't have people from New York fly in and rent bulldozers and augers and start digging wells. You don't know the communities that need the help. You don't need how to build up the support infrastructures. One of the things that works well for charity water is like we put around each well, we nominate a committee, the water committee, and they set the rules for the local well. It's 3 men, 3 women, and then 1 woman's in charge. The women are always way more responsible. And so it's true. You've seen, there's like data around that, right? If you lend money to women, you get it back. Yeah. So that's true across cultures. So we put the women in charge. They set the rules for the well. The well isn't free because people tend to abuse things that are free, so they put a very small nominal price on it. But they know what the appropriate price should be for the community. They set the opening hours and the closing hours and stuff like that. And so, but I can't just go and find out who the woman from the village should be. Like, I need a local partner who understands that village, who understands who the elders are, and who can help us find those people, right? And so that is a barrier sometimes to investment or to nonprofit work, is do you have the best people on the ground, right? So as virtual as InVenture is, so we have very few employees for InVenture in Kenya, but the employees who are there are absolutely kick-ass. So we need them to help us deeply understand the users in that market. We need them to help us understand the mobile carrier partners that we're doing a lot of business through these M-Pesa markets now, and so we need to know those partnerships really well. We need to, ultimately InVenture can be a company that can, like I said, figure out if you need a bike and sell it to you. And so we need to understand the needs of those cultures. And it's not, Kenya and Tanzania are not exactly the same. They have different cultural sensitivities. We need to know that. And so let me give you a great example from Google. Google, as you know, was just incredibly successful in so many cultures with this very simple search page, right? So it was just Google and the little input box in very little writing, right? And it was it was refreshing because most of the internet had these crazy pages and like, this is beautiful. And so we had a lot of success in the United States, Latin America, Western Europe, but we were losing in Korea. And so our nature was computer scientists like, okay, let's just try and make our search results better. So we were hiring more and more and doing better translation and like testing, like, are we giving them back the right results? And our stuff was better. Like Google has these tests they run where they run a search and then they take the results from Google and the results from Yahoo and the results from the local search engines like Dome and stuff, and they strip away all the branding and then they show those results to real human beings, like which ones are best. And that's how Google tests the quality of its search results, right? And Google's always, been the best and continues to get better and better. And so we're like, wait, our search results are really good in Korea, and yet we're still losing. We're still losing traffic. Why is this? So we sent some people to Korea. So we were. By the way, this was all being developed in near San Francisco in Mountain View, and by mostly Americans, some Indians, some mainland Chinese, and stuff like that, but not really many Koreans on the team developing this. And so we send some people there to do some testing, and you've seen focus groups before. You get a user in front of a computer and you're standing there with a clipboard, and you say, okay, go ahead and go to Google. So they type in google.kr and the page comes up, and so the tester says, okay, now search for flowers. And the Korean person would be sitting there like this still. And the tester would be like, okay, just go ahead, search for flowers. And they'd be like, and they're like, is there something wrong? Like, can you just type in flowers and search for flowers? And, we'll go through this. And the Korean would say, I'm waiting for the page to finish loading. And it was because in Korea, they had lots of really blinky websites that were very, very busy. They were very used to that. And so our website they thought was broken because it was so simple. They thought, well, shit, all the other stuff must not have loaded up. So, And then when we got deeper into that, it reflected on us poorly. They thought we weren't capable of building a more robust site with more stuff on it. And so that we must have been the dumb guy search engine. And so it was an amazing cultural insight that like we were blind to because we didn't have people there, right? And so back to your question, like, anytime I'm going to work internationally, like I want to make sure I feel like I have some understanding of that culture, I'm exposed to it, et cetera. But I need to have the most deeply trusted local partner there, or I think it's going to go sideways. You can't just parachute in and fix something. You hear these horror stories. A friend of mine has a nonprofit called Architecture for Humanity, where he was an incredibly well-known and successful architect in the developed world. And what he saw were, a tsunami hit Sri Lanka, and these aid foundations would come in and build these huge concrete houses. And he's like, those are completely inappropriate for this climate, right? Like, people are going to roast in those things, like a metal roof and concrete. And this climate, like, where it's never like not 110 degrees, he's like, that's just not appropriate. And so they're just imposing Western architecture onto these climates without actually talking to local architects and understanding like what works here, which building materials are available, which work, how do you get airflow through it, how do you get light into this house, like in Haiti, like a lot of the rebuilding in Haiti didn't take into account that there really isn't electrical light or electrical power available on a regular basis. And so the insides of the houses need to be lit ambiently. And so if you just put up solid building materials on the roof, nobody's going to be able to see during the day even, right? If it's all corrugated metal, nobody can see inside. And so, and yet you're not going to have that insight if you're just designing from the US or the UK. And so I think that's absolutely the key to cross-culture, kind of partnerships is, that, and this, by the way, this is something that when I talk about that office I shared with the Indian guy who was actually, from Botswana, there was another guy in that office who was Indian from India. And I remember I was talking about, what was I can't remember the subject, but I realized like, maybe it was like Michael Jackson or something like that. He'd never heard of Michael Jackson or been exposed to Michael Jackson at all, who I feel like the whole world had. But and then I was like, wow, you're really different. And as we started talking about like our compass and what mattered to us, each of us was on a very different page. And I was like, what's weird is because Indians like speak English well generally and say dude a lot, I had been lulled into the sense of thinking we were really the same person, right? That he had the same concerns and same values and same, that I did. And it just wasn't that true. Let me give you a really quick example from, if you guys don't mind me staying, a really quick, a quick example from China. Okay, so I was in this group, not unlike this. I was in this group of young leaders gathered at the Aspen Institute years ago, and it was people 25 to 40. Actually, it was supposed to be 30 to 40, but I was 25. They let me in. And it was supposed to be, the goal was moving from a life of success to a life of impact. So everybody in the room had some degree of incredible success, not necessarily financially. Some guys were building, the founder of Room to Read was there. I mean, an incredible charity that builds libraries in the developing world. There were a lot of really inspiring people in the room. But one of the guys who I won't mention was from mainland China. And as part of this program, we would read things together. So we would read like Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, and then we would talk about it. We'd read like an inspirational poem, but we would also read articles from like the New Yorker magazine about frauds in business. So we had some incredible fraud in that bubble. Guys named Ken Lay, like you've maybe heard of Enron or WorldCom, these huge fraudulent enterprises that cost pension funds billions and millions of dollars, and people ultimately went to jail for it. But it was incredible because a lot of us knew these people who worked at these companies or could have been recruited to these companies. It was just an incredible, like ethics just went out the window and everyone was taking for themselves. And so we had a big crash. And so one of the articles we read was about this guy, about these two guys, Dennis Kozlowski, who ran WorldCom, and Ken Lay, who ran Enron, and how they had both stolen money from their companies and used it to buy huge houses in Florida, where if you own a big house in Florida, you can't lose it in bankruptcy. And so even if you go to jail and you're sued, and you get to keep your $20 million house. And so they would steal all this money and buy these massive houses. And they would throw these lavish parties. And like Dennis Kozlowski had a $15,000 shower curtain in one of his houses. And he spent $5 million on his birthday party, but $5 million of company money. And so we read all these articles, and then we each, we had closed door discussion time when we'd each talk about things that we thought like, either we had done wrong or we saw an ethical lapse that we didn't speak up and try and stop it. And so we were kind of in a trusted little environment, confessing to each other, like, this is what I got to do better. My boss, I watched this thing happen and I was afraid because I was a junior employee or something. And after we'd all spoken for a while, the moderator called on our friend from mainland China and said, "You haven't said anything. Do you have something to add?" And he said, "I'll never understand you people from the West." And I always said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You kill all your heroes." And we're like, "Wait, did you read the same articles we did?" And he's like, we were like, "Okay, how do you think of them as heroes?" He's like, "Look at how they took care of their families. Look at everything they did to make sure their families had these huge houses and these great cars, and they got to go to great universities and everything." And we're like, "Yeah, but they stole all these money from these companies." He's like, "But their families were the most important. And they did everything they could to take advantage, to look after their families and to create these opportunities for their families." And I remember just looking at him and being like, it's so easy to judge him and say that's wrong, and yet maybe there is something beautiful about placing a family over a corporation, like he's just on a totally different scorecard than we are in our culture. And we had something similar happen when I was at Google. We had another China thing where it was revealed that a lot of code working on one of our Chinese products had been just stolen from a Chinese competitor. Like, it was just, when you open the hood, it was the same computer code. And so, this was scandalous. This isn't how Google works. So our head of engineering was like, "I got to go over there and publicly fire these guys, whoever did this. Like, we need to make an example of it and show the world this is not how we do business." So he goes over there and gets the guys in the room. He's like, "Did you steal this code?" And they're like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, why did you?" Like, "Hey, you want to see how we did it? Check this out." Okay, so they showed "Hey, we hacked this, and we called there and we got the receptionist to give us a password to this other thing, and we did all this, and we were able to get this, and it worked. It's awesome, right?" And he said he was there ready to fire them, and yet as he turned around, he realized these guys really think they were doing something amazing for Google. they really think that they were like proud in advancing the mission of Google. Like they thought they were going to get a bonus for it, you know? And it was just, it was a different culture where the loyalty was to the team, but not to some random intellectual property. And if you think about it, intellectual property is kind of it's an academic construct, right? Like the notion of copyright and stuff, copyright doesn't occur in any holy scripture, right? It's not in the Bible, it's not in the Quran, like you don't, and God said unto thee, like protect somebody's music, it's just not, it's not there. And so as a result, it's an academic construct. And those of us who grew up in these cultures are like, okay, I should respect your patent, right? And that kind of thing. Like that's not necessarily like a universal principle that organizes humanity. And so you're in this culture where intellectual property doesn't have that kind of value. Instead, there is much more of a priority on competition, on getting ahead, and so again, we were there to, he was there to fire that guy, and he was like, oh my God, I gotta. So we did a retraining to try and kind of bring people around to like how we viewed the world, but as a result, we just couldn't count on that. And so again, back to that question, like I just think you can't presume these other cultures, and the only way you can be successful there, whether as an investor, building a branch of your business there, or as a nonprofit, you have to have incredibly strong local partners. And that's another way that all of you can be successful, is to be in that translation business. And I don't mean literally just translating the language. I mean translating the opportunity, translating the business culture, translating like, here's how to come here and get stuff done. Whether it's in Korea and learning how to pour beer for the other person across from you, or how to walk into somebody's house and be respectable, how to turn down tea but turn it down twice and accept it the third time, and some of that stuff that's just traditionally cultural, or just understand like what it is, why this person is motivated, what are they afraid of, what's moving them. You're going to be advantaged of that. So I got to go. I really appreciate this time. It's been amazing. I really hope Reno isn't all of the United States. It's a special place, but I hope you guys do get a chance to travel a little bit more. I did hear you got to go on some pretty cool field trips around here and stuff like that. So I'm really glad that you've had those experiences. How much longer are you here?
2 more weeks.
2 more weeks. And then to DC?
Yes.
Cool. I think DC is really special. I think it's a great place to see. How long are you there for?
DC?
Yeah.
5 days.
Oh, that's good. That's a good time. It's super hot and humid, by the way.
Oh, really?
So some of your countries are, some of them aren't. But I'm really glad you're getting that kind of opportunity. I'm just really proud that our country has started an initiative like this, and I think you should all feel incredibly proud that you were able to distinguish yourselves to participate in it. So let me know over Twitter how things go for each of you, and stay in touch. That's the cool thing about Twitter, is I'm one reply message away. So, but I'm really glad this has been time well spent for me. So thank you guys.
Awesome.
I got to take my money. By the way, this is totally awesome. You got me this?
Wait.
Thank you, man.